Hello and happy Friday from the Oklahoma Association of Realtors. My name is Will Gattenby, joined by Senior Director of Government Affairs, Bryson Panas today. And this is the Friday Top 5 Advocacy Update. Will Roberts conveniently has this hour and only this hour off, so he won't be joining us for our update today. Bryson, how is the world of advocacy going right now?
Good afternoon. Going well. Welcome everybody back to our hopefully weekly segment here. And yes, sorry that Will Roberts couldn't join us, but good week at the Capitol today or this week.
Well, fantastic. More than one thing happening at the Capitol this week. Typically, you've got session bills, all sorts of other things, but this week we saw lots of guests or maybe future hopeful inhabitants of the Capitol. What was special about this week, Bryson?
Sure. Yeah, so this week marked candidate filing week, a 3-day period where candidates can go up to the Capitol and formally file for any office that is up for that election cycle. So this week we had candidate filing from April 3rd, Wednesday through Friday, April 5th, for about one more hour here as we record at 4 p.m. We've had 274 filings total across the state, average age of 52. And we also had all of our congressional House seats on the federal level. So all of our U.S. congressmen and women, they just had their filing over this week. We also saw statewide candidate race for corporation commissioner. That is our only statewide race we are tracking here. And then all of the Senate seats that are an odd number, so 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and so on, all of those are up for re-election this year. And all of the House seats, so not just the odd, but all of our 101 House members had filing as well. So a lot of activity up there at the Capitol. There were still candidates filing at the end here of Friday. And so we will see what that clear picture looks like on Monday or possibly tomorrow.
All right, Bryson, everybody knows that the Realtors Political Action Committee, or RPAC, is really involved in electing realtor champions and all sorts of things. What's the process for RPAC here? Maybe that's number 2 for the week. What's the process for RPAC here getting involved with these candidates?
Sure. So RPAC is getting ready to really start hitting the ground running for our 2024 election cycle. So starting this week, over the next 2 weeks, we will have first an NAR representative that will be joining our board of trustees. They will present congressional recommendations for investments with RPAC on that federal level. We will also begin simultaneously our disbursement subcommittee, which is a subcommittee within RPAC that the trustees set up to really be that first group of people that will vet any sort of investments that we want to speak about as an association. These will be from all over the state. Again, a lot of people filed and a lot of races happening. And so this process looks like a 1 to 2 month planning period that will be directed by first our disbursement subcommittee, and then the entire board of trustees will have their recommendations and say in discussion and that sort of thing. And so criteria we're looking for, and maybe for our membership and those of us around the state, really find an RPAC trustee that reach out. If you know any candidates, we want to hear from you. We want you to engage. We want you to be involved in that process as much as possible. And so please, over this next 2 weeks, it's so important to get this in before we have our primary election date in June. And so it's kind of coming down to the wire here and really starting. We'll be hearing a lot about candidates and races over the next couple weeks or next couple months for sure.
That's right. If you didn't know it's an election year, you're going to be reminded very soon on the airwaves, in your mailbox, and it's a presidential election year. So I'm sure some of you guys around Labor Day are going to start getting really tired of hearing about politics. So this is the fun time, primary season. Now that's the RPAC trustees. What about those folks who are tracking stuff at the Capitol? Have they met recently?
Yes. So that would be our Government Affairs Committee. We have about 36, 35 members across our membership this year. And exactly that, as you opened with, this was sort of business as usual up at the Capitol this week, if you could say it that way. I think you said it good earlier when you said everything's business as usual until it's not. And so that could change at any time. But we did review some of our priority legislation we'll touch on here in a moment. Really just some discussion around where bills are right now. But business as usual for the GA committee, we really saw just a standard timeline for our bills going through fairly often. We've worked a lot on a couple of them, but a lot of them haven't needed much work. And so the Government Affairs Committee got a chance to discuss. They meet every couple weeks at most, and sometimes more frequent than that. This week, though, as we still hear, we're still nearing some of these deadlines, but business as usual for the GA committee.
And now you said, I think business as usual. Last year's session felt business as usual until all of a sudden it wasn't, and things derailed. This year's, there's been some disagreements. House, Senate, Governor, Senate, the state Supreme Court weighed in on something the other day. But our business, our priority legislation, it seems to be going through fairly easily. You've been doing some work on them, like you said. Can you give us an update on what those priority legislation pieces are?
Yeah, two main pieces that we've talked about this entire session, but have really taken shape and form over the entirety of session. The first one is SB 1920, what we call our broker disclosure transparency, or greater, more robust law around broker compensation disclosure. That has had 0 no votes, whether it was in committee in the Senate or on the Senate floor. Now we move through the House committee and we've cleared that. And now we are nearing the House floor, which we do see scheduled for actually next week. And so again, 0 no votes there. This is a fairly straightforward bill, a little bit of amendatory language that isn't too big. It's not a robust overhaul of anything or like that. And so really good stuff with SB 1920. We also have the other piece, our main piece of priority legislation, year 2 running of our HOA transparency efforts. We have come, what we have said, full circle on the conversation. I think every single person in and outside of the state that has an interest in HOAs, which is literally everyone, I think, has been able to weigh in on this bill. And we do have a good solution, really changed by the day this past week. Looping in our GA committee today on the call, a lot of our results were just very favorable. We think we ended up in a really good spot. We're going to see that hit committee on Tuesday afternoon in Senate Judiciary, and we are going to be lobbying very hard to those committee members and any of you all out there that have an interest in this or know any of those committee members or want to get involved. Definitely pass on that information to them. But some exciting stuff that we think we've been able to start here with HOAs. And again, the GA committee ran a lot of that, and they're really happy where that ended up. And so good stuff there for our priority legislation.
Well, sounds like things going well. What about some of the stuff that's not priority necessarily, but still tracking and still really interested in? You got a couple updates there?
I do. And so there's 3 bills primarily that we see scheduled already for next week. One is on the House floor and has really flown through. I would honestly say this is sort of a piece of priority legislation because it was last year. This is a companion bill to our restrictive covenants removal in property deeds bill, and this does the same thing for plats. You've probably heard us talk about this, but SB 1617 is going to the House floor, and we expect an easy road there as well. It's been scheduled early and often and has had no problems thus far. This bill, if it does pass the House floor without any amendments, will then go to the governor's desk. And so in a really good place there. Forgot to mention with 1920, that would be the case as well if we went through without any amendments. So really good stuff there. HB 3318, we've mentioned in the past, also has another companion bill that's a little further along, but this is an unfair trade practices bill, also in conjunction with AARP and some other partners. But we have limited service contracts essentially to 1 year in this bill. Similar to what we also have in SB 1920 again, that I just mentioned, but there is a provision in that we are able to really solidify these 1-year service agreements so we can avoid our 40-year listing fiascos that have been going on for the past few years around the nation and in our state. Finally, we have HB 2158. This bill is set to go to Senate Education, we think, but this is a good bill that we've talked about in the past, financial literacy education for high schoolers. And we were able to give a little bit of input on things like mortgages versus rents, escrow, some things that we're actually thinking we're going to get in law that would then, not to fast forward too much, but be allowed to be sometimes applicable as a half math credit in some cases, or a graduation requirement for a broader just GED or something like that. This financial literacy can be taken as a math or standalone. But anyway, the realtor input and NLS bolstering the industry a little bit more within this language has been pretty positive. So we are hopeful we'll see that. We are told it should go next week, but we'll keep an eye on it.
I love that financial literacy one. I know there are folks all over the state who spend time volunteering in schools, talking to high school kids about, building credit, budgeting, and things like that. And for many of them, homeownership is just a dream that they're going to hopefully achieve someday. And hopefully that's a building block for them as they get there. One other thing I wanted to mention about Senate Bill 1920, I forgot to say, is that our CEO here, Brian Hutchinson, did an interview with the Journal Record this week. And so we'll be sending that out to folks via email, and you'll see it on social media as well, which I thought was a really great piece and really highlighted the impact that Senate Bill 1920 will have as far as it relates to the 40-year listing agreements and protecting consumers on that regard.
Yes, for sure. And I also do want to plug our bill tracker, which you can see all of the bills we just talked about, but also quite a few more and the status of those. So that is okrealtors.com/bill tracker. And all of those should be current as of today. And so check that out if you're curious and want to continue following along with us.
It's a great segue to get to our ending. For all of your advocacy needs, if you want to see the priority legislation list, if you want to see the legislative priorities, or that bill tracker, okrealtors.com/advocacy will cover all your needs. okrealtors.com/bill tracker, as Bryson said, we'll get to a list of all those bills. Folks, thanks for joining us for the Friday Top 5 Advocacy Update for today, April 5th. I can't believe we made it to April. It's flown by so fast. And folks, we will see you next week. All right.